I'm Allison Jonjak, the Cranberry Outreach Specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. These videos are the on-demand recordings of UW Extension and the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association's virtual brown bag lunch series. These monthly sessions offer growers and researchers a way to share timely and relevant information. We hope you'll enjoy and continue to engage with us.
Hi, I'm Tom Lochner, the Executive Director of the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. We're excited to be a partner with Extension to bring you research-backed resources, tools, and tips to keep Wisconsin marshes productive and profitable.
So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our June brown bag. We're moving right along through the growing season as blossoms are starting to open up. Want to go through a little bit of housekeeping. I have live transcriptions on for those who would like to see closed captions. Go ahead and turn on your live transcript. Want to thank the Growers Association and University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension for allowing us to host these brown bag sessions. And I feel like I'm missing something that I usually say. Oh yeah, when you have questions, you may either unmute yourself and ask a question, you may type a question right into the chat, or if you have a question that you'd want to ask anonymously, in the drop-down, choose to Allison, and I will read that question on your behalf, in my own voice. So all of these are options. I'm gonna offer Tom the opportunity to give us a little update from the world of the Growers Association.
Sure, thanks, Allison. We've been busy at the Growers Association, as I'm sure all of you have, trying to deal with all the challenges that come along every day. A couple of things to announce is that we've been working to fill our public education and communications position, and we've had a successful candidate that we have an offer out and accepted offer, and we'll be announcing that hire pretty soon so we can make sure our communications programs continue seamlessly. And at the station, we've been very, very busy getting ready for the summer meeting and a couple other events that we're going to be holding. But as Allison mentioned, the lab is being built out this next week. We're completing the water control structure replacement, and that should be wrapping up next week and the week after. And so things are moving along at the station. We're getting ready, as I said, for the summer meeting. We hope all the growers will come out. We're going to do some unique things this year for educational programming, doing mini clinics on the marsh rather than sitting in a tent talking to you. We're actually going to take you out into the field and you can talk to the researchers who are conducting projects on the marsh. So a lot of things, exciting things going on. Hope everybody's healthy and survived the storms earlier this week. And to those of you out there that it applies to, wish you a happy Father's Day. And I'll turn it back over to you, Allison.
Thank you. And yeah, as a reminder, as we've had all that weather going through, one of the things that makes me proudest of working in the agricultural world is how everybody pitches in and helps when there's cleanup to do and work to do. We've got equipment, we've got healthy bodies, and it's always good to be able to help out our neighbors. So today's topic, we're going to have Pam give us the consultant's observations and looking forward. We're going to have Leslie give us a pathogens and fungicides update, and we're going to have Jed give us a little mini tour of what it'll be like to have our mini clinics in the marsh, as Jed is going to join us live from our herbicide trial at the station.
And I think Leslie is going to talk about fungicides, so we can let her do that, and then maybe answer some questions about using fungicides with that hail. Should we be worried about the pathogens entering in those injured, the tip or the hooks and things like that? So hopefully she can answer some of those questions for you.
Awesome. And I have not seen any questions come in on the chat yet, but thank you very much, Pam, for all of the very detailed update.
Yeah, and I'll keep an eye on the chat as well for any questions, but otherwise I'll just go ahead and jump in. I kind of just titled this Navigating Fungicide Usage for Fruit Rot Control this season. And I know that most folks, as Pam was just alluding to, are heading into this probably this weekend or early next week, depending upon your variety. So the intention of this presentation is certainly not to change what you're already planning to do, but simply offer some things for you to consider, especially as I think a lot of us are thinking about last season, June of last year, and how hot things got, how quickly things moved, and we're kind of looking down somewhat of a similar trajectory, I think, for this year as well in terms of that speed, right? We kind of started really slow, and now it seems to be all gas and no brake. So here we go again. Oops, okay. Okay. So, yep, as I mentioned, the season started slow. I remember all of us, I think, was at the round table where we were all kind of, or not the round table, like meeting early this year, but we were all kind of talking about how slow things were going, and someone must have heard us because then it really went fast after that, right? So most of us are heading into those first applications this weekend or next week, and that forecast is going to, again, look high. I know it was high last week. It's going to look high again in most of the regions this next week as well. So, and then I also want to acknowledge some of the hail damage or wind damage that might have happened in some marshes, central Wisconsin as well. So I will have a slide on that to talk about fruit rot and fungicides. So before I jump in, I just want to remind everyone of the products that we do have available for fruit rot control. Now, this is not an extensive list, right? You can look into your handler guides or the pest management guide for Cranberry for Wisconsin to see the extensive list, but I kind of tend to think this is the most commonly used chemistries for us, and probably not even including the multi-site fungicides because of export qualification. So, but I really want to highlight here that our multi-site fungicides are only low risk fungicides. And when I say low risk, that means that their risk for development of fungicide resistance is low. Now, low doesn't mean no, but the odds are fairly slim from what we understand about these chemistries, but we don't really use them too much in Wisconsin. So what we do use oftentimes are the single site fungicides, primarily Indar, Proline, and Abound. And these are medium to high risk, with Indar and Proline being medium and Abound is considered high risk. And then we also have premixtures, which contain fungicides from FRAC groups 3 and 11. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as well later on. And in terms of their risk, it's very depend on the active ingredients, but in general, the risk of fungicide resistance development is still going to be a little bit lower because you are using 2 different modes of action, which we always want to encourage. And oftentimes that's the reason why we tank mix our fungicides in our single site category. So current use pattern for Wisconsin, this data I took from our surveys last year at Cranberry School. I think I asked everybody, what kind of applications you were making. That actually should read. I guess that's for 2021 season. So most folks are using 2 applications, and I think most folks are trying to target maybe 10 to 20% bloom. I know last year was really quick, and it might have been outside of that range a little bit. And folks oftentimes use that first application as a Proline, maybe Indar and Abound, maybe Quadras Top, and then roughly 80% in bloom applications hopefully happened. I put question marks here because I think we were all a little taken aback as to how quickly this showed up last year. So I'm not really sure when it happened. I'd have to talk to Allison and look back at our notes for the trials because it snuck up on me as well.
Yeah, it was also mid-June, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. It could have been the same day for all I know. Last year was really, really intense. We still have a fair amount of folks not using applications, a couple of folks who got 1 application in and a couple of folks who got 3 applications in. So a little bit of variation here, but for the most part, we do see 2 tend to hold strong as our use pattern here in Wisconsin.
I did have a question, if it's all right to interject here. When people are switching from a new planting fungicide regimen to an established planting fungicide regimen, what are you kind of looking at in order to let people make the decision that, okay, this counts as established now and I don't have to treat it so aggressively? Like what helps a person make a decision to go from 2 applications down to 1? Do you have any answers on that right now?
So that's something that we're trying to study right now, especially in some of the new hybrid varieties. And that's some work that I'm doing with Dave Jones at Ocean Spray. So we're trying to answer that question. It doesn't seem clear at the moment. And again, first year of the trials, and it came quick, fast, in a hurry. So I think we still have some information to try and dig up there. But we do know that those first few years tend to be the more kind of tender years for those cranberry vines before we get into that higher rate of production? That's a great question. So in terms of hail, I really appreciate Pam reaching out to me and so that I can make a note about this in my presentation today. We didn't see hail in Madison, but we definitely saw some wind and had some pretty severe power outages as well. So I know that hail damage was observed, probably a little bit of wind damage as well. So what does that mean for fruit rot and what does that mean for fungicides? Well, fortunately, there was some really excellent work done several years ago by Lindsay Wills-Hanson and Patty McManus, looking at the impact of hail on fruit rot and whether fungicides could be used to mitigate that. So long story short, unfortunately, fungicides that they applied that were followed hail damage that was simulated using gravel, I believe, did not reduce cranberry fruit rot incidence or increase yield. I highlight here that these simulated hail events were made in July, August, and September. They were not made in June, which is where we're at now. So these treatments were made when there was already, small fruits to somewhat, full-size fruits on the vine, right? We're not in that stage yet. So there's a little bit of a difference there. But no matter, they saw that the fungicides didn't really seem to provide a reduction in fruit rot development. Interestingly enough, they also didn't really seem to distinguish different fungal species and fruits that were intact, right, not damaged by the hail versus those that were damaged. And I think that helps us lean back into what we've known for a while about cranberry fruit rot, and that is that most of these fungi tend to act as latent or symptomless infections in the vine or in the fruit. So even with that hail, while it can probably obviously cause more damage in fruits that aren't marketable, in terms of what you're able to do is a little bit limited after those hail events. But now the question is, what does that mean? Because we don't have fruit on the vines yet. And by the time we had hail, we didn't even have flowers on the vine yet or blossoms on the vine. So what does that mean? Usually we see hail as something that creates a point of entry for a pathogen or an infection court. What we do know about most of these fruit rot pathogens is that their infection court is the flower, it's the blossom. We didn't have those on during hail. So in terms of fruit rot pathogens, I don't think we would see an increase in fruit rot infections at bloom because of the hail events, if that, hopefully that's clear. But it could be creating an infection court for something else. And so while we don't have a huge array of cranberry diseases in Wisconsin, I tried to rattle my brain and think about timing and what that could potentially we might see. And so I'm not saying this with any, it's very anecdotal and just more or less thinking forward about what we might see. And I'm thinking upright dieback, potentially. I've not had any reports yet. If you've seen something, please let me know, but I'm thinking about wounding. And upright dieback, which is caused by the pathogen phomopsis, can actually come as a result from wounding at any point during the season. Now, the title of this slide is actually a title that Patty McManus used several years ago in an article about upright dieback or uprights dying back. So dieback in particular is an biotic, right? It's a pathogen. Uprights dying back is just a phenomena that's caused by different abiotic stresses or injuries. And so we do see that in the field. But they can be difficult to differentiate because sometimes the uprights can look similar, and right when an upright dies back, unless you're watching it hour after hour, it's probably all going to look the same. So what I would recommend to you, if you do see any issues with your uprights this season, keep in mind two things that we kind of understand about differentiating upright dieback versus uprights dying back. The first thing is that we're looking at the pattern in the field, and like any other disease pattern, it tends to be a bit scattered, and you will see that with upright dieback. You're not going to see a scattering with uprights dying back typically. You might see likely a patch or area that has dead uprights in it, and that's going to be more indicative of an environmental or abiotic cause instead of a biological. And the second thing to consider is timing. Phomopsis traditionally has shown up in mid to late summer, whereas you likely would see dead uprights from uprights dying back earlier in the season, probably May, June, depending upon the cause of the uprights dying back. So again, this is not something I've heard about, but I wanted to put it on your minds in case you are starting to see anything manifest after experiencing any hail or wind damage. So new year, new approach. How are we feeling? Maybe you can give me some ideas in the chat here. As we know that 2021 was a high rot year for Wisconsin. So I don't know if that means folks are thinking about increasing the number of fungicide sprays, trying to get a trash flood if you had time to do something like that. Keeping in mind, chemistries have really increased in price this year, and the availability of some products has been really limited. So we might see a situation where the cheaper and the more available chemistries went out this year in terms of our fungicides. So thinking about all of this, if you're thinking about cutting cost or cutting corners, I think it's really important that we think about the considerations that you need to make this season. What are the risks that you could be taking in different scenarios? So with that, I'm going to offer some scenarios that we could potentially encounter, perhaps we've encountered in the past, and just kind of talk us through them a little bit. The first one is a quick progression of bloom. So again, that seems like a potential and very real possibility this year. So I would say check your records from last year, ask your scouts how quickly did things move. I think it's important to keep an eye on that from season to season, especially if we tend to see these trends continue. Little time between bloom progression means acting quickly, especially getting those fungicide sprays on, or potentially missing that optimal window for those sprays. That timing between 20 to 80% in bloom may not take very long, especially in some of the more modern hybrid varieties, which I think we saw last year at a lot of places. And finally, shortening that application interval to hit critical application windows is going to be something we might have to deal with again this season, especially I know next week, the first couple of days of the week after we probably hit 20% are going to be really warm again. So the second scenario is using fewer sprays, right? And this could happen for many reasons. It could be that products are expensive and you can't afford to cut corners elsewhere in your insecticides or your herbicides or your fertilizers. You might not have that flexibility. Bloom is compressed, and so there might not be enough time to get more than one spray onto the beds. I'd say if you don't normally use fungicides on your beds for fruit rots, right? There's probably a lot of Stevens beds where you don't apply any fungicides. Then you can probably get away with no sprays again. I'm not sharing any of this to scare anyone, right? That's not my intention. But I take it that water and fertilizer management is really critical in a lot of these situations where we're not having to use fungicides on those beds. So if you don't have any sprays, your flowers are going to be unprotected at bloom if there's inoculum flying around. And if you've got 1 to 2 sprays, you are going to have some protection of those flowers. Granted, perhaps more of those blossoms may escape if you only have 1 spray versus 2 sprays, which is why we traditionally have done the 2. So changing application rate. This is also something that I've heard a few folks talk about or consider, and I want to just dive a little bit deeper into this if you're thinking about it this year. So in cranberry, we tend to use a total of 2 applications per season, I would say, max, right? This is the most common use pattern. This is an incredibly different story for other fruit crops, as I'm sure you all are fully aware. So we have 2 chances, maybe 1, to get it right, and it's all during a critical period, which is bloom, to prevent any infection of those pathogens. So in accordance with a label, you can decide what rate of fungicide works best for your marsh, but I would encourage you again to check your records, see what's worked for you in the past, and continue moving with the products and the rates that have used for you. If you're thinking about lowering and increasing rates, of course not increasing beyond the max label rate, they may not impact disease incidence or yield. So keep that in mind. And in some cases, you could have long-term impacts such as a selection of fungicide-resistant isolates. So we're going to talk a little bit about that here in my next slide. So how do you know which fungicides are going to have an impact on something like that? And it really depends on the chemistry that you're using. So I want to just briefly talk about fungicide resistance development and how that looks different for our FRAC 3 fungicide. So Indar, Proline, half of the ingredients in our premixtures, and then our strobilurins, so our Abound, and the other half of our ingredients in our premixtures. So something called qualitative fungicide resistance is when fungicide resistance results from modification of just one gene. Pathogens are either sensitive or they're resistant. Yes or no, right? Very easy. And we oftentimes see this with our FRAC 11, which is our Abound fungicide. Quantitative fungicide resistance is usually based on the modification of several genes. So pathogens really vary. It's not a yes or no. It's a little sensitive, medium sensitive, highly sensitive to a particular fungicide. And we tend to see this more with our FRAC 3 chemistries like Indar and Abound. So when you start to see losses of resistance, it's going to look very different based on which chemistry you're losing resistance to, With qualitative, like our FRAC 11 or our azoxystrobin, it's going to be yes or no. The chemistry worked or it didn't. With our FRAC 3, it might start to just, you don't see as good of control, but you still see some control. So that's the difference between those types of resistance. So in cranberry, we also have single active ingredient or multiple active ingredient fungicides. And I think we're kind of all aware of that and how that works. Again, I'm just highlighting the fact that we do have low, medium, and high risk fungicides, as I pointed out in that first couple slides of the talk. However, in Wisconsin, we do rely on the medium, high risk chemistries as we're not using most of the low risk fungicides. Never apply a high-risk chemistry like your azoxystrobin to a solo, apply it solo to a field, right? Because that would increase chances for fungicide resistance development. So this is why we always combine things, right? This is why we use these tank mixtures. The bottom line is that multiple active ingredients are going to be better than a single, especially when you're trying to manage a fungal complex of more than 12 fungi and when you're trying to minimize the risk for fungicide resistance development. So the final scenario, because I know I'm getting to my time, is premix or tank mix. And so I saved this for last because I actually figured I would talk over my time, as I tend to do. And also because I just wrote an article about this in the Cranberry Crop Management Journal that you can read, and I have all this in much more extensive detail there. But just really trying to highlight the fact that tank mixing and pre-mixtures are two different things, right? Tank mix is when you add ingredient A, ingredient B, and pre-mixture already comes with two ingredients already combined, right? So we have a variety of these options here in Wisconsin, and I want to really emphasize more than anything that while they have the same FRAC groups, 3 and 11, 3 and 11, 3 and 11, they have different FRAC 3 ingredients across the board. And the azoxystrobin, while they all have it, it is coming at different rates per gallon. So not equal. These products are not equal to one another. Now, are they all highly effective either against fruit rot or cotton ball? Yes. But I really want to emphasize here that they are not the same product. So I think I'm going to stop right here because I have this table in the article and I'm happy to put that link in the chat. So I want to make sure I leave enough time because we've got some field correspondence, I think, with Jed. And so I know folks want to get to that as well, but I'll put the link of the article in the chat so you can see the table and see some additional information. And I will hopefully be able to answer your questions in the chatter at the end. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. I actually had one more question come in, and then we'll look forward to having that chart in the chat. Can we use the 10-day forecast to predict whether we might have increased or reduced pathogens? Can we use it for an in-season decision, or should we stick to history?
Yeah, it's tough because we've also done studies, right? I say we, the royal we, folks before me have done studies to show that incidence in one year doesn't indicate incidence in the following year for fruit rot, right? So history is not always the best indicator. And I don't know how much weather is either because we had a pretty dry year last year, but still had a lot of fungi infecting that usually spread during rain events. So I would say the best indicator is your bloom window. If blossoms are open and fungi are available, which they probably are, whether it's high or low, they're in the air, and that's your critical period to prevent. So I wish I had a clear answer, but we're trying to answer some of those questions now with some of the folks in my lab doing research on fruit rot.
That makes sense. Thank you. Yes, and likewise, for me, if you have anything that you wondered, send an email, send a text, give me a call. Tom, did you have anything you wanted to close up with? Otherwise, we might be able to give people. I know once we are done here, I'll go be sweeping the second sweep of my leaf hoppers after that trial application. So I know there's plenty of things to do in the afternoon. Any closing thoughts, Tom?
No, just hope everybody is doing well, and we wish everybody a safe and successful growing season this year, and have a great weekend, and thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.